I'm Madeleine Morris. I'm a reporter for 7:30 and I've been hosting this series of question times here at the Wheeler Centre for the past couple of months. Great to see a great crowd tonight, and it's clearly all because you're Coles and Woolworths shareholders and you really just wanted to be here just to cheer them on. Obviously, the role that supermarkets have in Australia is clearly of great concern and of great import. Every single Australian, 23 million of us, even the babies, spend $100 a week in Coles or Woolies. Not just in Coles or Woolies, but in Dan Murphy's, Masters Builders, in the Shell, where you go and get your 4 litres, your 4 cents off because you shopped at Coles that day. So these businesses sustain us and we sustain them as a country. But there are very many questions about whether that's a good thing, the impact they're having on farmers, the impact they're having on food systems, the impact they're having on diversity in a whole wide range of areas. And these are some of the things we want to talk about tonight. We do have an eminently qualified panel to talk about this tonight. Malcolm Knox, first of all, is a Walkley Award-winning journalist and author. He writes fiction as well as brilliantly researched non-fiction, and his latest book is Supermarket Monsters, The Price of Coles and Woolworths Dominance, which is where I got that amazing $100 a week statistic. That was not my own, that's Malcolm's. And that book for sale is going to be for sale tonight at the end of the hall. Kirsten Larsen is a food specialist. She's not the sort of food specialist you see on MasterChef, though I'm sure you're not bad behind with a knife as well.
No MasterChef.
She analyses food security and sustainability, and she's developed food policies for state and local governments, and she's also the director of the Open Food Network, which is building an open market for food producers, distributors and retailers. And Dr Nick Rose is the National Coordinator of the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance and the Food Systems Coordinator with the Food Alliance at Deakin University. He's also helped shepherd the People's Food Plan into existence, which prioritises ecologically sound and economically sustainable farming practices, which all of those things sound like very good things. And I just wanted to get started with a question of my own, though, to you, Malcolm. Having read your book, when you were researching, what did you find is sort of the biggest effects that you can see of the dominance of Coles and Woolworths, these two market players?
Well, I think when you talk to growers and when you talk to people like dairy farmers, that was actually where the story started. My brother is a large animal vet up the north coast of New South Wales, and he was relaying stories from me, from his farmers, from his clients, about the kind of double whammy of deregulation and Coles Woolworths dominance that was not only driving people off their farms, which we've heard a fair bit about, but even penalising those who were the winners in the race to get the Coles contract or the Woolworths contract. Those farmers as well were, over the long term, suffering. In the short term, they could get the security of what appeared a nice fat contract, but in time they were finding themselves in the same situation as the farmers on the outside. And that was one of the first stories I heard, and it kind of remains, even though I've canvassed the entire, felt the whole octopus, if you like, I'm still left with that sense of everybody losing on the land. Everybody ultimately loses.
Is that what you guys, in your experience, believe to be the case as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's where I guess I came to this space, through policy and environment, climate change, things like that. And then as I started getting out and talking to people as part of my research, and hearing the same story from farmers and from small businesses and small food manufacturers throughout the food supply chain, it became very clear to me that, we're really quite stuck in being able to transform or change to a more sustainable food system if it's not possible for people to produce food in a sustainable way and make a living. Like, if we can't keep farmers on the land now, then what are our chances of getting young farmers to take that up? And really, if we can't change the way that the market works and create opportunities for people who want to do that, then it's all over. We just have big corporate intensive monocultural farms across the whole country, and, that's what we have.
Yeah, and I'd agree as well. My entry into this area came from living for several years in Central America, in Guatemala, where, going back to the decades of the middle of the 20th century, there was one corporation that essentially controlled all the farmland and used that land to grow one or two crops to export for commodity purposes, and kept the poor indigenous majority in poverty, and that led to a civil conflict that ended up with the genocide against 4 Mayan ethnic groups in Guatemala. So that sort of concentration of corporate power flows across the food system at every point, really, not just in this country but globally. And I think you're absolutely right. The food system isn't working for most people. It's working for a small handful of corporations that are squeezing all the value out of the food system. Raj Patel has a great metaphor for this, which is the hourglass figure, where you have a large number of producers feeding products into a value chain, and then a large number of consumers at the other end, but there's a stranglehold of corporate interests in the middle that are sucking the value out to the detriment of everybody else.
But when you say it's not working for the majority of people, I mean, I think it is working for the majority of people, the majority of consumers, isn't it? I mean, you go to your Woolies, you go to your Coles, you can get your beans all around every single season, you can get your kiwi fruit every single season. It's working for some people.
Sure, and that's the justification. The argument of convenience and price is the justification. But if we look at the health impacts, for example, I have 2 children. Their generation will be the first in post-colonial Australian history to have reduced life expectancy, and that's as a result of the food that we're eating. And I think that's a shocking indictment on our food system. We can't blame that on
Coles and Woolies.
Well, you can. There's been research showing the way, and I'm sure Malcolm goes into this in some detail. The way they structure the products. Anybody who's been into one of these supermarkets will know that at the aisles close to the checkouts you have lots of confectionery and the sodas and the Cokes piled high and at discount prices, precisely to drive people's shopping behaviours. So I think they do have some responsibility at that level.
And also your question about, who's winning has to be qualified by what is the time period we're talking about, what's the scope of the question. And we're in a phase where Coles and Woolworths attained their level of market control, which is about 70% of the groceries market, some time ago. They've had that since late 1990s, around the turn of the 21st century. They had accounted for their competition by and large by then their Coles began in 1914, Woolworths in 1924. Together, through very similar strategies, they had dominated the market by 15 to 20 years ago. The question then was, if they were going to keep growing, where were they going to turn to maintain that growth? The expectation would be, as an effective duopoly, they would use their combined strength to screw us, to screw the consumer, jacking up prices. What had been done in Britain was something that British executives came into both companies to advise on, and it was a kind of an economic miracle for their shareholders, which was that while suppressing prices, they increased profits manifold. How did they do that? By not screwing us, instead screwing their supply chain. And that's not just the farmer with the dirt under their fingernails. It's it's other multinationals. It's the the Parmalats and the Lions but it's also a lot of very innovative Australian food manufacturers. That was where the supermarkets identified the pot of gold to be, and to the tune of some $2.4 billion over the last 7 years, they have transferred a chunk of profit from that group to themselves. Now they've pretty much reached the end of that, and we know they've reached the end because the schemes they've undertaken to squeeze it harder have got them into trouble, particularly Coles. Now, to answer your question, where do they go next? Once they've got the supply chain down as lean as it can go, their shareholders will be demanding continued growth of the scale they're used to. The home brands, the private brands will totally dominate your supermarket shelves. They'll have vertically integrated. Where will they go next? And so your question about, well, we're doing pretty well, we're paying $1 for our milk and so on. Let's ask the same question in 10 years and see what the answer is.
All right. I think some of that, sorry, just to jump in quickly, I think some of that is already very evident in some places where people have done analysis of pricing of supermarkets. You know, 2 Coles supermarkets in different regions can have very different pricing depending on the level of competition that they have. And once they get rid of any competition, then the prices start to rise. That's seen in a whole range of areas, whether it's from kind of lost leadership. They'll have a couple of products that are very cheap, and then if you're not paying attention, you get caught on all of the other kinds of vegetables. And you also hear a lot of stories, particularly in regional communities, of just outrage at the produce quality that they have at Coles and Woolworths, because basically they get the seconds that are moved from the other supermarkets and they've got no alternatives. There's no fresh fruit and vegetables left available, able to compete in that small town. So they're kind of like, well, how on earth do we get all of the produce that's grown around us? And all we're getting from Coles, you get it home, it's gone off, you have to throw it out a day later. So once
they're
they've
the canary in the coal mine, you say?
Yeah, that's right.
All right.
Since Aldi supposedly got lower prices, are they also putting pressure on suppliers?
Malcolm addresses this very nicely in his book.
A lot of people go to Aldi to give the big up yours to Coles and Woolies. And it's a kind of a protest vote, and it may be a protest vote over the things that Kirsten's just talked about. It may be over anything. The truth is, it's one of those turkeys voting for Christmas protest votes. Aldi do the same but worse. Aldi have made incursions into the UK market, which has really forced the big 4 UK supermarket companies to Aldiise themselves, and this is by doing worse. What I mean is vertical integration, screwing suppliers down, bringing them in and ruining them essentially, and then casting them away for the next deal. And also the percentage of imported product at Aldi is considerably higher than at Coles and Woolies. The concern is that with Aldi really placing pressure on them, they will follow the Aldi route in an accelerated way as a means of attacking that threat.
Was it Dick Smith who said that you quoted in your book that we will have a duopoly in 10 years?
Yeah, Dick Smith said we will have another duopoly in 10 years and it'll all be Aldi and Walmart. And I think in a way he's right. I don't know if they'll be called Aldi and Walmart. They might be called Coles and Woolworths still, but they will be supermarket chains and conglomerates such as they are, which do what Aldi and Walmart have done. And remember, Australia's never very original in its business strategies. These ideas were imported to Australia mainly from the USA and from the UK. We're not seeing something that hasn't been seen in those countries before. They have larger populations where the alternatives that we might talk about have had more success, but the tactics have been seen in other countries.
Can I ask, is there anyone in the room here who will say that they're really happy with the current effective duopoly that we have, that they feel that it works for them?
Is there anyone here who works for Coles and Woolworths?
Is there anyone who works for Coles and Woolworths? Because I'd love to hear from you. We did invite them and they didn't come. If there's anyone who'd like to put their hand up. So if no one is happy with it, who here never shops at a Coles or Woolworths affiliated store? Can we have the microphone up here, please? And can I just hear from this lady here? So bearing in mind that we're talking, this lady in red, we're talking Dan Murphy's, Kmart, who else? Pubs, Bunnings.
We shop at IGA, so Peter Monty's in Fitzroy, which is, I think, still a family-owned shop.
Just mic a little closer, please.
Peter Monty's in Fitzroy. So the IGA stores, I'm not sure if they're just as bad, but we made a choice to not shop at Coles and Woolworths.
And that was your conscious choice for ethical reasons?
Definitely. I've worked for suppliers that used to supply Coles and Woolworths in the dairy industry, and I know what they do to suppliers. So that was one reason, and plus just the lack of choice. They keep removing brands and products we buy, so we decided to stay or go to another supermarket that still had a range of products.
Do you know, though, if you're definitely not shopping at Wesfarmers or what's Woolies' parent company?
Woolworths.
Woolies, yeah. Or Woolies. I mean, you don't.
I don't
you
know
don't
if
go to
IGA
Bunnings.
is.
Yeah. So, but things like Bunnings for your, or you never go buy anything at Dan Murphy's.
We would go to Bunnings, yeah.
So it's
Shelves,
tough,
yeah.
isn't it?
service
Yeah.
stations.
It's really tough. I mean,
But we'd like to know how we can avoid them. So if anyone on the panel can give us some ideas about how we make sure we avoid spending our money there.
I think you've got to have a dose of realism. Like, these are monolithic. Like, I can't put up my hand and say I never do, you know. And I know that I find myself at 11 p.m. in a situation where I've got no toothbrush, or I'm in a country town and there's no other alternative. Of course, I go into Coles and Woolworths. But I think that we have a lot of options for times when we do have choices, and it's especially if we're living in the city. Every time that you're making a decision about fresh produce, about food, about small manufactured goods, you usually have a choice to not be at Coles and Woolworths. There will be some small business attempting to fight it, whether it's a greengrocer, butcher, baker, all of those kinds of things.
so how does IGA actually, I mean, because I think that's what lots of people think of when they think about not shopping at Coles and Woolies, and certainly is the most easily available. How does that fit into the picture, Malcolm?
Well, Coles and Woolworths are corporations that own their premises. So every Coles is owned by Coles, which is owned by Wesfarmers. Every Woolworths is owned by Woolworths. IGA is a buying group owned by a company called Metcash, but the ownership system is franchised more. So your IGA, as the name suggests, is an independent person. And I've got to say, from putting on an imagined supermarket hat, what they would say is the presence of IGA and the fact that you go there proves that it's not a duopoly. You have the freedom to go outside. They only control 48% of the petrol market in Australia. There's another 52% where you can buy your petrol from. I think with grog, if you really want to avoid the supermarkets, grog is the hardest sector. They really do have a stranglehold on the unless you're going to go to a pub with a takeaway bottle shop or a nice little independent wine shop, which are getting fewer and fewer on the ground. But it's very hard to escape them. However, playing devil's advocate, they will say that IGAs, of which Hill Street Grocers in Tasmania is one that I wrote about, a very successful independent mini chain. Coles and Woolworths would argue, I suppose, feeling quite happy with that. Long may they prosper, because they show that we don't control everything. And look at Aldi. Aldi's growing. That shows that we, Coles and Woolworths, don't have duopoly power.
Do they care about the backlash, the recent backlash?
Oh, they care very much. They, the massaging of public relations is, I think, one of their key strategies at the moment, because it must have taken them by surprise, the turn of public sentiment against them. And that turn feels at times almost unanimous. You never get people phoning in to on radio shows or writing in on feedback to articles. They're great, Coles and Woolworths. Everyone's so unfair to them. You don't hear from those people at all. So this is a major concern of the supermarkets.
And you can sort of see that in their advertising and things like that. The happy farmers helping to stack the shelves in Woolworths and things like that. They're really trying to.
You just
say,
don't see the gun. The gun.
That's right. It's this kind of they're really trying to say we are this, and it's been really interesting. For people, I guess, like us who work more in the, the food movement or the alternative sector, is seeing the extent to which they're mimicking and trying to, incorporate strategies that are being employed outside. So, for example, in their online, Coles and Woolworths online, they have a big feature on seasonal organic veggie boxes, for example. You can order all your different...
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can order all your different boxes, and they've started having... I've started hearing about meetings with Coles about talking to their suppliers to try and pick up regional suppliers that they can highlight in some of their stores that these are local. So it's really starting to kind of, they're getting that people are interested in this and they're going to put a gloss over it, but I don't think they're going to pay those suppliers any better. They'll just use their names You know, so it's a really interesting kind of challenge for all of us, kind of trying to innovate and push against, all right, how do we get consumers out of this space into something alternative when they've got such big budgets to kind of try and mimic those strategies?
And it's interesting, Malcolm, that you mentioned that Coles have brought in a lot of management from the UK to reinvigorate their strategy. Because if you look at the UK and what's happening to the supermarket sector there, some of their supermarkets are actually in a lot of trouble. Tesco in particular is in a lot of trouble.
Our refugee policy at work, taking British supermarket.
So what a writer for The Guardian called Felicity Lawrence has done a couple of pieces on this, and one of the things that she says is that they've had competition from Aldi from the cost, from the price point, and then there's just the effects of austerity and price pressures on consumers generally in the UK over a number of years, that people are just getting fed up with the model and tired of the model, and wanting to go back to high street shopping and moving away from the supermarkets as a consumer sentiment. So if the UK has any perspective on our future, then
And how is that actually playing out in terms of are those other opportunities to shop away from
there has
Tesco?
been around the world. In the UK, there's been a resurgence of direct sales of different market mechanisms where consumers want to be more connected with their producers. You have a huge upswing in direct farm gate sales, for example, veggie box direct ordering systems, community supported agriculture, farmers markets, all those kind of direct supply chain, short supply chain relationships are booming as they are in the United States and Canada, and here as well. I mean, in terms of market share, farmers markets didn't exist in Australia until 1999, and now, according to some stats, they have 7% of the fresh food market, which I think is quite remarkable.
That's an extraordinary statistic, actually. But I was just thinking, I'm from Queensland originally. In Victoria, we have very short supply chains. We can grow stuff all year round. Where I'm from in Queensland, you can't. There's not, in terms of arable land, you can't. You can grow some citrus. Some of the year, there's certainly very little vegetables that you could actually grow.
What part of Queensland are you from?
From central Queensland.
Right, because there are fruit bowls in Queensland as well.
There are. I mean, I can have all the lychees and mangoes I want. I can have all the beef I want. But in terms
there's actually quite a lot of vegetables in Queensland because we have a big seasonal swap. So for a big part of the year, all of our lettuce, our carrots, all sorts of stuff coming from Queensland.
But in terms of, because we are such a big country, does that actually play into whether we can have the short supply chains? I mean, does that make that more or less viable as we're looking further afield?
I think it's very viable. And in fact, in the United States, there was research published a couple of weeks ago in that country that showed that I think it's 90% of Americans could be adequately fed by food produced within 100 miles of where they live.
Wow.
So if that's possible in the United States, I don't think we're that different really.
Really? Climatically, that wouldn't make that
well,
much
I think
difference?
in the interior of the country it might be different,
yeah,
but
sure.
but I think in the main where people mostly live, certainly in Victoria, I think it's entirely feasible.
Yeah,
there is a difference around kind of population densities and distances compared to the States. So I think a lot of the models that we've seen, we're working very closely with people in the US and Canada and UK around food hubs and alternative food distribution, and a lot of the models are quite hard to get to be viable here because we are often dealing with bigger distances for a smaller number of customers. But some of that will potentially change as we can get more customers moving into these models.
It's about growing the pie, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about growing the pie, but we definitely do have a distance challenge. So where a lot of American cities, if you think about Melbourne, Victoria, if you're a producer anywhere in Victoria, the chances are you're pretty focused on the Melbourne market, and that could be a drive of up to 4 hours, which is well outside what the Americans are tending to call a local food system. So, and if you're a grower in remote Queensland or Western Australia, then definitely you've got some big supply gluts to deal with. And also at the same time, we've got this supply-demand imbalance. We grow 90% of Australia's asparagus in Kooyarrup, about an hour outside Melbourne. You guys are going to have to eat a lot of asparagus to mean that they don't export that asparagus or send it to Brisbane. But at the same time, we have a lot of things. I think it's 4 months of the year that we don't produce strawberries in Victoria. So we could be eating 8 months of the year of Victorian strawberries, but in reality, that's not what happens. It goes all over the country, it gets exported, and we import it at the same time.
Yeah, I spoke to a lettuce grower. Sorry, it's just to follow.
Please.
Directly, a lettuce grower in New South Wales who was quite distressed because he's destroying lettuce. Often he's destroying more than he's selling. He is a supermarket contracted lettuce grower,
right?
But his contract stipulates that he must grow and provide up to the maximum order for each sales period, and they might have requested that amount once, but every time he has to grow that much, and what they don't want, he has to destroy. As a proposed solution, Senator Nick Xenophon, who launched my book yesterday in Canberra, said he wants to draw up a bill that would outlaw that kind of exclusivity contract on food, and enable such a grower to go to the market, for there to be a clearing mechanism if they have that amount of excess that they're destroying.
That example is just a shining case of environmental vandalism, but also social vandalism, when we have like 1 million Australians who are experiencing food insecurity, and most of us don't eat enough fruit and veg, and yet we're destroying perfectly good produce because the supermarkets won't take it.
Yep. And he's another winner who'll be a loser in the long run, because you can bet that his next contract size will be a lot smaller than it is now.
We had a question down the back.
Thank you. I was wondering what part we can get legislation to play, both in like percentages of market control, but also enforcing transparency of message, so they can't get away with the good food people and slogans like that are meaningless but feel good. And also in relation to that sugar film, the way so much of the supposedly healthy foods were high sugar and really not healthy at all. So can the government help us out here?
Kirsten, you work a lot with government.
I don't work a lot with government anymore, actually. I used to work a lot in policy and attempting to do food policy at the state government level. But I am a lot more focused on grassroots alternatives, enterprise kind of stuff at the moment. So I will
hands thrown up in despair. Is that why you did that?
Not hands thrown up in despair. Just I guess I come from a position now that the government will follow, and if we can present alternatives, then it's much easier for the government to get behind them. And I think we are seeing that quite a lot. I think, Nick, even with your work around local government and food policies, it's much easier if you could be having that discussion with local government. Right, what we want you to do is get behind these kinds of enterprises who are working with farmers to create fair supply chains. We want you to support them with access to buildings. We want you to support them with marketing and branding schemes. So it's much more tangible than just, can you do this? But at the same time, I think absolutely fair play to anyone who wants to spend their energy attempting to get the federal government to actually legislate around some of this. But I think the chances of success in the near term are, small.
There has been a lot of change at local government level in Victoria, and I think Kirsten's exactly right. That's been a response to community action and engagement around issues such as community gardening and urban agriculture, where a number of councils, City of Melbourne, Yarra, Darebin, Moreland, lots of councils developing guidelines and resourcing and frameworks to support communities to do those kinds of initiatives. So it is a kind of like a grassroots movement, but I actually do agree that there is a role and a need for action, legislative action at higher levels of government, both at state and federally. And I think, again, I'd look to the United Kingdom as an example where an engaged and mobilised community over many years actually achieved legislative change in the form of a groceries code that became law in 2010, and then resourcing that with the groceries code adjudicator, effectively a supermarket ombudsman who has strong legislative powers to impose punitive fines up to 1% of gross turnover of the supermarket's revenue, which in the case of Coles and Woolworths would be $500 million. So it's like a serious amount of money. The difficulty that she's finding in the UK is that suppliers are so terrified of the consequences if they go to her to reveal abuses of power that she's not actually getting the evidence to do investigations. So that's a serious point. But I guess my main point, and this is the point of the food sovereignty movement globally, which includes about 300 million people, led by farmers responding to these kinds of concerns across the whole food system, is that unless we actually get engaged as citizens and go beyond seeing ourselves as passive consumers in a marketplace, but actually see ourselves as political beings with capabilities to make changes working together, then we're not going to see these kinds of outcomes. So we need to actually work together collectively as a political movement, and that's what we're trying to build here with the food movement.
So it's interesting that you're talking a lot there about local government, because I'm sure that that's probably not what the lady was thinking of. She was thinking more, the question was, she was probably thinking more of a federal level. So can you just flesh out a little bit more about what you're doing at a local government level? So
local governments are able, they don't have legislative powers, but they can put in place policies and frameworks and strategies and plans to support the kinds of things that are happening, that we see happening in Melbourne and Victoria, such as community gardens, farmers markets, use of public spaces to grow food at that kind of level, and also local food strategies. Mornington Peninsula Council has a local food strategy which has been developed collaboratively with local producers and businesses. That's supported by a local brand that's just been trademarked, Mornington Peninsula Produce, and that's building the idea of local identity and provenance and a bit of a culture around food. So I think in our Anglo-Australian culture we do lack that a bit compared with, say, France or Italy, where there's a very strong tradition and connection to the land.
We're getting there, though, don't you think, a little bit?
We've got it through TV, through MasterChef, but I think in terms of like a really strong, serious food culture, we're still some, we're as we become more cosmopolitan, we're progressing, but it's, we come from a bit of a low base, I think, from where we came from.
Okay. Next question.
Can I just make a quick comment on that? I guess harking back a little bit to the origins of the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance, which actually came out of when the federal government announced that they were going to do a national food plan, and a whole lot of food movement activists, kind of led by Nick at that time, were sort of like, all right, well, we want a seat at this table, we want to be part of this discussion, and was very firmly met by a, out of the way people. And that was actually the origins of the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance of, well, hang on, there are a lot of us, we need to start developing a joint voice. That's what led into the People's Food Plan. So I think that has been a process of probably 5 or 6 years of actually starting to develop an identity around, a movement of people that's all of these kinds of bits and pieces into something that can start to have a voice. But I think, that's what's happening in the food movement, and I think that there's a real challenge. If you compare, I had conversations with people in France last year about similar issues. It's the same issues all over the world. And they were like, all right, well, we just need to talk to the government about changing the rules around land ownership transfer on the outskirts of Paris, because they're losing all of their vegetable production into monoculture cropping and things as well. And I kind of laughed and said, yeah, like, that's going to work. And they were like, yes, it will. The sort of confidence that actually there was an engaged citizenry and farming community, and you look at some of the stuff that's happening in France at the moment around bans on supermarkets throwing away any saleable food, these kinds of things. I think we have, it's actually the state of our democracy and public conversation, and food is one part of that that we're working on. But to actually have a citizenry that is able to put enough pressure on a government around issues of substance.
So and also, why do you not hear a peep out of Canberra?
Well, very, very, very quickly about Canberra, because I was there a couple of weeks ago. The ACT government had a roundtable on food policy and having a collaborative discussion looking at the whole of the food system. There's not the political capacity at the moment in the Territory government to actually implement that in a food policy, but the Conservation Council decided to embark effectively on a People's Food Plan for Canberra, which they're going to do collaboratively with producers and businesses and generate their own community-led policy for the ACT. And that will have strategies and actions that communities and producers can implement right now as actions and change on the ground, but it will also be making political demands of the Territory government to put pressure on them to, as Kirsten said, to follow the lead of the community.
So bit by bit.
May I just make a very quick comment?
Sure, and then we're going to go to the question down at the end, and then there's a lady who has had her hand up here a couple of times, so down there, and then we'll come up here.
And I think, look, one of the ways to, I'm just going to, make a point, one of the ways to put pressure on the government is to allow them to follow the leaders. And so that's, again, about building up the leaders. And one of the things that we're trying to do at the Open Food Network is make this whole sector more visible so that it's easier for you to find, where you can buy direct from farmers, where the farmers markets, where the co-ops, where the independent retail stores, etc. are. So I think, if you want to push the government, make sure that you're pushing all of the businesses and all of the alternatives that actually show the government there is somewhere to move.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I work at one of the main markets at Melbourne, and it's great. And we, try and encourage people to obviously shop locally and support small business owners. But one of our main problems we come against is the C word, that being convenience. And the reality is that as much as we try and kind of have this great experience, and we speak to people and they want to support local businesses, but the reality is people are working 9 to 5. They're having to pick kids up from school. They're getting home on Saturdays. They're shipping kids to sport or whatnot, and then often by the time it hits Sunday, they're so exhausted that as much as they want to support the market, actually getting to the market is an issue. And I guess the same with farmers markets. I mean, it's kind of 1 day a week for 4 hours in a lot of places. And I guess for us, we see that as the biggest challenge is the issue of convenience and how do you compete with these stalls that are sometimes open, supermarkets that are open sometimes 24 hours or till 11 o'clock at night or from 6 o'clock in the morning. And I think as far as consumers go, they're wanting to support farmers, but the reality of kind of getting home from work and getting dinner on the table often doesn't allow them to do that.
Well, can I throw the question back to you? I mean, how have you thought collectively at whichever market it is you work at about actually coming up with strategies to address that convenience issue?
Yeah, we have, and I guess the issue that we come up against with convenience is that part of the reason why people love shopping at the market is they know their stall holders, and they're the same woman who's been selling nuts for 30 years, and they love seeing her face.
They can't work 14 hours a day.
And that's the problem. And so it's that issue of if we're extending business hours, it's more convenient for the customer, but then I guess our concern is how do we balance that with supporting our stall holders and allowing them to kind of run businesses and keep it local and not have just the random person in there every time they go to shop.
Yeah, I can have a go at answering that. This is the big question that kind of was playing in my mind 4 years ago when I decided to leave government and had been talking to lots of people who are doing alternatives, farmers markets, etc. And really looking at, okay, how do we actually start to scale this up in a way that's, working together, and particularly using technology and tools like technology to help make things more available. So, the key is about how do we get that source transparency so that you can actually see who the farmer is, but increase the number of ways that you can access that food. So some of it, for example, we're working with a number of farmers markets about how to take their offering online so that people can order through the farmers market in the same way as those producers that I know, but then increasing the kind of distribution options available. So whether it's somebody aggregates and does a delivery from that market in the afternoon, or they have a second a week market, they store food and deliver on a Wednesday, or people can pick up. That's just one example of the ways that we're using the Open Food Network to actually look at, okay, how convenience is different for different people, and what people need to be able to do is find, where can I access it, what time, does it help me to order in advance? We know from looking at Coles and Woolworths that they're putting massive investments into their online and collection kind of facilities, because actually that is quite good for people who are busy to be able to order when it's convenient and know where your food is coming from. So I guess part of what we're really trying to do is take that side of convenience, but direct people to all of the independent, diverse, local, to be able to see who the farmer is, how much the farmer's getting paid.
But sorry to interrupt, but yeah. the issue with that is that not that you might be able to get your fruit and veg, yeah. But then what about your dairy? What about your cheese? What about your tinned goods? I mean, I go to South Melbourne Market every Saturday, yeah. But then I have to make a second trip to Coles because at the delis there, they only stock the Italian tinned tomatoes which have been dumped in Australia, which I don't want to buy. I want to buy the SPC tomatoes, and I can only buy those at Coles. So I end up making a second trip, which frankly is a pain in the ass. Yeah. But I do it because I want to support, both.
I think it's a real. I mean, so to start with, it's not just about fresh produce. Lots of these alternative distribution organisations are doing everything from bulk foods, household, meat, dairy, etc. I think it's only one part of the solution. We're really trying to support, like Wild Things in Fitzroy, for example. You can go there and get just about everything you need, mm-hmm. The same Terra Madre. So really we need to be looking at how do we support more of these independent ethical retailers and really get behind them. But whilst recognising that for them to match Coles and Woolworths, for example, on opening hours, is a big personal toll and cost for kind of small organisations. So it's not like there's a simple answer, but there is a lot of innovation. There's a lot of people trying. So one of the big things is really find the people who are trying and stick with them.
I'm going to come to you just in 1 second. I just want to really quickly go back to the lady who works at the market, if we could go back really quickly. Can I ask which market you work at and how business is going, actually?
I work at the South Melbourne Market, actually, so you can come and say hello to me next time you're there. No, we're increasing visitors year upon year.
Yeah.
So we're definitely getting a lot of people through the market still. I guess though there is, which is a difficult one, balancing, trying to make that shift towards with the market being more of an experiential thing. So we're trying to attract people so, they can actually come, they can catch up with friends, they can see some live music, and that's happening across markets in Melbourne. So that is good. And I guess probably with people are still buying there, and our fresh food people are doing quite well. Probably we also have a general merchandise section, which is a slightly different kettle of fish.
Right.
But they are doing well, but they still do kind of, I guess, find it hard knowing that they are being. I think price is is a difficult thing for them, whereas maybe 20 years ago markets were known for being really cheap, and I think now they're finding that a little bit more difficult competing on price.
I still reckon it's cheaper for me to buy my fruit and veg there than it is for me to go to Coles to buy my fruit and veg. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to ask you to quickly race up to this lady up here who has had her hand up for a little while.
Thank you very much. I guess I just wanted to leverage off that comment at the end that the lady made about price. Convenience is obviously a big issue, but I think price sensitivity is also, I know for me, I've got the flexibility of not, having to watch price rapidly, but price sensitivity is obviously a big driver for a lot of people, and it's so pivotal to the grocery chains' advertising strategies. It's, their major tagline. So how do you deal with that?
I'll make a quick comment. Look, it is absolutely pivotal. Even people who can afford it will still, it's the most common feedback you get in any of these alternative retail chains is price. There's no getting away from the fact it's really hard. Like, that's the game that Coles and Woolworths are playing. So for anyone else to have margins that actually make their business viable is extremely difficult. At the same time, we had some students recently go out and do price reviews against the Southeast Food Hub, Bawbaw Organics Food Hub and Grow Lightly Food Hub. So one of those is in Warragul, one's in Kuirup, and the other is in Currumbara. And Bawbaw Organics and Grow Lightly absolutely caned the supermarkets on price, and their product is all organic. But neither of them is making a hell of a lot of money. There's lots of volunteers, there's lots of subsidisation in that supply chain to make it happen. So the kind of ongoing viability of keeping those alternative businesses in place, but they sort of know that, they can't be more expensive or vastly more expensive than Coles, or people will just leave. So that's a much bigger social, demand consumer kind of question, is will people really pay more? It's really hard.
I don't have an answer to that question specifically, but I just want to mention something because I think it's interesting, and it's something that we're getting involved in now, and that's community-supported agriculture as another form of direct exchange. I don't know how many people have heard of community-supported agriculture. It started in Japan in the 60s, and it's quite big in the United States. And in its most authentic form, it's a relationship between one farmer and a group of nearby local consumers, where together they actually work to understand the costs of production and what the farmer needs to sustain herself and her family, and what the inputs will be, and they work together to work out a fair price for everybody and share the risk through the season. So if there's a weather event and the produce is diminished, then everybody shares that loss, and it doesn't just fall on the shoulders of the farmer. So the farmer is empowered to set their price. The consumers can cross-subsidise each other in a lot of these systems, and that is a form of exchange that's taken off massively in Japan and the United States. And that's an example of what's possible. I think in Australia we've been trained just to focus very much on price and go for what's cheapest, but it's not inevitable that we're always going to be that way. I think cultures can change, but it's a matter of raising our levels of effectively consciousness and decisions about what we want to see as a food system going forward, because the sorts of things that Malcolm has highlighted in his book, if we cast forward, we're losing farmers at the rate of 7 to 10 every day. Young people don't want to go into agriculture. We're going to be increasingly dependent on imported produce, and we're not going to have a knowledgeable cohort of farmers to actually feed us in the future if we don't start to do something about it.
Malcolm, you were going to jump in?
Well, I don't think you can entirely separate the question of price from convenience. There's the toothbrush at 11 o'clock at night, and it's while you're getting the toothbrush, you'll get the bottle of milk, and then, I've got to walk all the way to the milk section. I might as well pick up a few carrots, because blah, blah, blah. And the question, just going back to the earlier question about convenience, a key recommendation of the Harper Review on competition is pretty much total deregulation of shopping hours, which, going by the fairies at the bottom of the garden, economic rationalists argument, this is going to be great for everybody. It's going to be great for you at the market. It's going to be great for the corner store. By totally deregulating shopping hours, you're all there. You're all in the race with Coles and Woolies, which, as an idea of competition policy, sounds to me a little bit like saying, you can all run in the Olympic 100 metres final. We'll make the track really big so you can all go. Now, Usain Bolt will be there, and he'll be starting on the 75-metre line, but you're all in the race. You're all going to have a chance of winning. That's the idea of competition policy that is, I would say, knowingly disingenuous, fostered from Canberra.
Okay, got one question here, then someone down the back, and we've got 12 more minutes, so we'll try and skip through a few questions.
Just interested to hear your views on reforming the food system through direct engagement with the supermarkets, given that they're so influential, their scale, their reach is significant, and any reforms in supply chain management practices or waste management or employment practices might have a really huge effect. What do you think the scope is for changing the system by directly engaging with them, encouraging them to adopt more sustainable practices?
What exactly do you mean by direct engagement?
Working with them in a dialogue perhaps to support the alternative movement, as well as encouraging them to be more transparent. How open and receptive could they be to change, and how sustainable do you think it could be if they were to make some changes?
Well, I throw the question back to you. What do you do when they say, okay, we'll stock your lentils, but you've actually got to go into an auction system for shelf space. So we're only going to put it on a shelf where people can see it if you go up against X, Y, Z, and you go up against us with our home brand lentils. And that, if you're the worth of your contract, potentially, let's say it's $500,000 a year in lentil sales, well, I'm sorry, the cost of the shelf space is $1.5 million. So
you're basically saying there is no dialogue?
There is. People have been down that path. Many people have been down that path, and they're the people who've come out at the other end who are so wild in their antagonism towards.
In the UK, where they've got, as I said, they've got some legislation in place now and some enforcement around it. There is a more effective dialogue now with the supermarkets, and they are changing their practices apparently in terms of their treatment of their suppliers, although it's not as good as it could be. But that's come about through, as I said, sustained political pressure by a lot of people over a long period of time, and legislation and enforcement powers, which we don't have in Australia. So I think that needs to be in place before they're actually going to, respond appropriately and make some changes. I mean, they do engage with groups like Second Bite and Food Bank in terms of rescued food and the issue you mentioned of waste. But on the other hand, they're doing what Malcolm said and forcing suppliers and producers to grow huge volumes, not allowing them to sell anywhere else, and the waste in the system is absolutely massive. So it's kind of a bit of, for me, it's corporate greenwashing, that kind of relationship. Yeah, it's not really getting at the root of the problem.
Super quick, I think dialogue is very difficult when you have such a massive imbalance of power, and I think basically the summary of that is we need a more powerful block before a dialogue becomes anything vaguely meaningful. Personally, I'm not interested in it, but it's kind of like I can see that if there are around particular issues, whether it's, the sow stalls or, things like that, of course, if the supermarkets make decisions, they can have big impacts. But I think we need to focus on building the power of the block that is forcing the supermarkets to change behaviour. Just asking nicely is not going to work. Okay, there was one question that I had seen someone way down the back, and I wanted to... Oh, hang on. Have you already had a go? Down the back? I think you may have. I'm sorry. I've withdrawn the microphone from you. We're going to have one question per person. Yes, down there, please.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. I thought you were the same person. Okay, go down the back. Microphone down the back.
It's a similar looking hand.
Yeah, it was.
Thank you. Some months ago you could buy a Streets Magnum ice cream and have a 1 in 6 chance to win. I was able to claim the free ones at the local milk bar and service station, but when I tried to claim it at Coles, they referred me to a disclaimer that Woolworths, Coles and Aldi were excluded from the scheme.
Oh, that's just mean. That's just plain mean.
I was going to write to Streets and tell them that I was never going to buy another Magnum, and also let Coles know that I thought it was deceptive advertising and I would never buy a Streets from their store. I haven't done that yet because I was curious to know what's the best way to go about venting my spleen to the participants.
Well, look, I think that's a very serious question, though, actually. I mean, about how do you actually feedback?
If there's anyone who really wants to get active in this, in the UK they've got a website called Tescopoly, which is kind of like an anti-supermarket campaign group. I'd love to see that happen in Australia. I don't know what it'd be called, but there's an idea for someone to...
The typical result of that will be that you can no longer buy Magnums anyway in Coles and Woolies, because you can now get the, let's call it a magnet,
The Coldham.
in exactly the same appearing package that is made by the same people essentially, but it's a Woolworths Select brand, and good luck going elsewhere for your Magnum.
Okay. I'm very sorry to hear about your ice cream, and I hope that you get your free ice cream sometime. Yes, please, on the side.
Hi, Kirsten. I mean, it's been touched on a little bit. You spoke about sustainable farming and the need for attractiveness to young farmers, because at the moment it's not a hugely attractive area. How do you propose that we would make those changes that are not just initial kind of incentives that then fade away?
I think it's about being connected with and supporting them through the market. So it's about making sure that they actually have market access with the produce that they're producing and that they can get a decent return on it. I think it's also really important about the information transparency so that we can see more about the production practices that people are actually applying on farms. So this is, again, part of the kind of changing consciousness and conversation about people being more aware of all of the amazing things that Australian farmers are doing to improve sustainability and landscape management. I think there are some real issues around young farmers which are connected to, young house buyers, etc., in terms of actually being able to get access to land, access to, they have to borrow millions of dollars to be able to buy a farm at the moment. So there's lots of work just starting to go on about, look, how do we actually get those young farmers who want to be there to be able to get onto farms? So there's kind of the immediate, being able to connect with them, buy their produce, support them as they're getting started, stick with them. And then the stuff around the supply chains, but then there's also the systemic stuff about how do we actually make sure that as all of these farmers who are retiring, that their land is not just getting bought up by international, multinational corporations, the Chinese government, the United Arab Emirates. There's a lot of that going on. How do we actually organise ourselves so that that land can be being made available to young farmers?
Okay, lady here in the front, yeah, and then we are, Malcolm's got to catch a plane, so we're going to...
I'll try not to be long-winded. There was an article in The Age last week...
Could you put your microphone
about the price, comparing the price, and Aldi came out as almost half the cost of the other supermarket, the Coles and Woolworths. Now I shop at Aldi. Can you explain how it is that Aldi is able to sell their produce, or, that just generally I can shop there and my dollar will go almost twice as far? And can you also tell us which of those three, if any, are more ethically correct places for us to be shopping? We're going to have to buy those grocery items. I certainly don't ever buy vegetables or fruit in any of those, in the Coles or Woolworths. I have a good little local market at Berwick where I can buy things every Sunday. But ethically, should we be avoiding Aldi?
So ethically, should we be avoiding Aldi, and how are they so damn cheap?
Well, in my view, ethically you should avoid all three, but Aldi comes last, and for the reason that they're cheapest because they vertically integrate, they import, they own the entire supply chain. They have essentially a serf-like scheme of workers, and that's why you're paying cheaper prices. And also, Aldi get by stocking in vast bulk, chef's trousers. If you want to get 50 pairs of chef's trousers, you'll find them lying in the corridor at Aldi. They do all these weird and wonderful deals, which may help them in those measurements when surveys are done. Their chef's trousers are cheaper than any trousers you can buy at Big W, but you're being duped to a degree.
We are almost out of time, so I would like to just wrap up with a question to each of you about, for people who are, as we all appear to be here, concerned with the current system and wanting to try and ensure that we are still helping Australian farmers to get the better deal, that we continue to have a sustainable food. What would be your top thing, each of you, that you would recommend that all of us go away and do? And not something, unrealistic, something that an easy takeaway that we can all take away and do. Yes.
Can I let Kirsten and Nick have the final word, because I think they're much more in the business of providing solutions and providing hope. I'm more in the business of arousing anger.
I think you're doing it quite well. Yeah, all right,
that's what I do.
Okay, so let's start with you then, Kirsten.
I'll do like a blatant, self-promotion. Look, we're just about to launch properly the Open Food Network after a couple of years of working on it. It's being launched, it's open source, so it's being launched in the UK and Norway and South Africa at the same time. But what we're really trying to do is build up there the transparency of the database, so you can find the farmers that are selling directly, you can buy from them, you can find your local cooperatives, buying groups, you can start them. So it's really about trying to drop the barriers to entry for alternatives and really to work together as a collective so that it does become a much more convenient experience for people to find and access those. So openfoodnetwork.org, and we're actually having a launch party next Friday if anyone wants to come.
So I'd encourage you to do all that. And so Kirsten's taking care of the economic democracy and I'm focusing on the political democracy. So I'm going to, again, do a self-promotion, as Kirsten's given me permission to do that. So join the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance, go to the website and search the People's Food Plan, Fair Food Week, get involved, become politically active, because I don't think we're going to change this just through making individual consumption choices. We're going to change this by working together and building a movement that actually makes this a political issue, because it is a political issue, because what we're here talking about is power in our society and who holds it and how it's exercised, and that's what Malcolm's book's about fundamentally, and that's what we need to shift. And we only do that through working together, because throughout history the lesson is elites don't give away power willingly, they give it away when their demands are made and they're forced to, and that's what we need to do to come together as society and make those changes. And finally, Kirsten and I have got a book that's coming out as well. You were going to say that?
I was going to say that, but I just, on a really practical level, if we want to, where should we shop? Should we shop at IGA? Should we shop at the market? Where
all of the alternatives, anything,
all of the alternatives,
anything except Coles, Woolworths, and Aldi.
And
in Melbourne, there's heaps of them.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. So stick with them, even when it's a bit inconvenient. Do it anyway.
So Nick is editing an anthology of the fair food movement in Australia. Kirsten's written a chapter for that, and that is going to be coming out in September. They're going to be speaking at the Melbourne Writers' Festival in August. And Malcolm has written a great book called Supermarket Monsters, The Price of Coles and Woolworths Dominance, which you can buy down the back. And he is going to be available for signing for 5 minutes. Otherwise, he is going to miss his plane back to Sydney. But if you would join me in thanking very much all of our panellists, Malcolm Knox, Kirsten Larsen and Dr. Nick Rose.
Thank you.